Hello and welcome to Culturally Illiterate, a podcast where four friends overthink comic book movies and Matt plays mind games with Jake on whether or not he's recording. I'm the first of your hosts, Jake, and I think amaretto tastes like an orgasm. With me are my friends and fellow co-hosts.
My name's Jason, and I just set up a new area for myself to record in.
Cool. My name is Matt, and that's all you need to know. Well, I guess I do have a fun fact. In Spider-Man 2002, William Dafoe did, I think, around 90% of his stunts.
That is a fun fact.
All right, and I'm Sean. My fun fact is that I edited the introduction and Jake didn't read what I wrote, and I'm very disappointed.
Why don't you read it to us now?
It's too late.
Read it to us now.
It's too late. It's already gone.
I told you, y'all are always welcome to read intros, outros, plots, whenever you want. All right. Well, before we get into the topic of the day, anyone got any recs? Or any stories? Because I wanted to throw out one real quick. I just finished a book called Age of Cage that takes a look at the 1970s to about 2022 and evolutions in the film industry, but reflected through the lens of Nicolas Cage's career and how the trends impacted him and how he impacted trends. It's not really a Nicolas Cage biography. It makes a point to not go into personal information about him that's not readily available and relevant to the main topic at hand. But I think it's a really fun look back at an interesting career and about how film trends change as a whole. So if you have any interest in the film industry and in watching movies, I definitely recommend it. And of course, if you're a fan of Nick Cage, you'll probably enjoy it.
That is an interesting...
I did not hear
Very good book.
That's interesting.
Cool. Anyway, I got a recommendation.
It just sounds so dismissive of what Jake recommended.
Well, not because
What is it, Matt?
it's my floor now.
It's my time now.
I have the floor.
What is it?
So for my animation fans right there, I'm messing up again because I'm tired. But for my animation fans out there, I recommend some Mickey Mouse shorts. Believe it or not, it doesn't exactly have a unique name, but it's basically directed and produced by the guy named Paul Rudish, who was from the Cartoon Network studios, and he basically helped revitalize Mickey Mouse because Mickey Mouse, like, for the longest time was seen as like some kind of like boring mascot. He was like a nice guy. He was like an everyman. He had relatable problems in his old shorts, but that doesn't really like age that well, especially like these ages. And so Paul Rudish and his team revitalized Mickey Mouse with his new shorts that came out in, I believe, 2019. And they are actually great. They are actually more loony than the freaking Looney Tunes, if you can believe that or not. The animation is amazing. It feels like Mickey Mouse, but at the same time, it feels modern. The animation energy is amazing. The movement is amazing. The jokes are actually really funny because what they did to Mickey Mouse was he is essentially like a good man and he helps everyone. Well, they basically dialed that up to 11 to like insanity levels, to the point where like I'm trying to think of like a certain short. So there was basically one short in which he has to take out the garbage for this old lady, and then it turned out to be like a mountain heaps of like 50 trash cans, and he couldn't say no, and so he does it anyway. And I do a very bad job of selling it, but how it plays out in the actual short is very loony. It's very funny. Also, it has like some SpongeBob inspirations because there's actually some like gross out humor in it, and it's really great. So I recommend people watch it.
I've seen parts of it. I do agree with Matt. It's good.
Well, that's the thing though. It's like people have seen it. The shorts could have upwards to like tens or maybe even like hundreds of millions of views. I know there's like tens or millions, but I'm not sure if it's in the hundreds. But either way, it has gotten a lot of views. But I didn't see that much people talk about it. I only like saw like clips of it online. I was thinking to myself, what the hell is this? And then I realized there's like a whole series free on YouTube. So I'm like, okay, I'll give it a watch. And it's actually really great. I think the entirety of season 2 is available on YouTube. So go watch it if you want to.
Exciting. That's another thing I didn't know about.
I guess I'll go next. In terms of recs that I have, I only have a recommendation, and that is I finished Chainsaw Man, and it was actually really good. I recommend you go see Chainsaw Man.
Have you read the manga as well, or just the anime?
Is that...
No, I've only watched it. I want to read it eventually. It seems like the way that the show ends, it's obvious that like they're obviously setting up more, and it ends kind of disappointing, more in like a way that it's like, oh, you're definitely leaving this open for more, and I have to wait a while for the next season, but like it's still really good, and it will probably make me read it. So I recommend watching it, probably reading it too, but I haven't read it yet.
Let me guess, you didn't know about that, Jace.
I did not. Well, I actually did know about it, but not to the degree. I had heard to the title before. I was actually about to ask if it was an anime, and then Jake asked if he had read the manga before.
It's a hentai.
That kind of answered my
question. It's a hentai.
So now I have nothing, actually. I have nothing left, Jake. Thanks.
So, this episode we're covering Spider-Man, released May 3rd, 2002, written by David Cope, directed by Sam Raimi, and shot by Don Burgess, with an evocative score from Danny Elfman. The movie stars Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker / Spider-Man, Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane Watson, Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn / the Green Goblin, the prick who fumbled being Seth Rogen's best friend by being scumbag as Harry Osborn, and with J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson, Rosemary Harris as Aunt May, and Cliff Robertson as Uncle Ben. As we discussed recently, back a couple episodes ago on X-Men, we're trying our best to avoid spotlighting abusers, bigots, creeps, assholes, when they're involved in a movie that we're covering. Instead, we want to take the time to acknowledge how we can support others. I recommend checking out It's On Us, www.itsonus.org, which is focused not only on providing support for survivors of sexual harassment and assault, but on educating young men and really everybody on understanding consent, educating bystanders on how to handle situations if you're witnessing one. I think there's a lot of focus on what women should do to protect themselves, and those things should be taught, but the most important thing is really to teach men the bare minimum of what consent looks like, because as simple as it is, too many seem to have no idea. The rest of y'all, I want to give y'all the floor to speak on this if you want to, if you have anything to say. But I just, for my part, something that's impacted me in the past is the comedy special X by Daniel Sloss. And from it, just the "you need to talk to your fucking boys" line from it. Because it's a special that I don't want to get too in the weeds with it, but it deals with sexual assault. And that when you see the warning signs of the people in your life, in your friends and a brother and a cousin and a whatever, to talk to them, to listen to the women in your life, listen to their experiences, because it's essential and upsetting and eye-opening. And I didn't really set out to tie this into the themes of the movie today, but everyone has the ability to prevent sexual harassment and assault, even if not directly, just through your own actions and through talking to the people in your life, talking to your boys. And that means you kind of have an undebatable responsibility to do so.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Everything that he said.
I don't think I could say anything to add to
much.
that would be better than that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he pretty much covered all of it. You gotta hold people accountable. Fuck them.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just keep your hands to yourself and let's move on.
That was well said from you last time, and I think it bears repeating. Matt. All right. So, moving on. On a school trip, the movie starts with high school senior Peter Parker visiting Columbia University Genetics Laboratory with his friend Harry Osborn and his crush Mary Jane Watson. There, a genetically engineered super spider bites him, and he falls ill upon returning home. Meanwhile, Harry's father, Norman Osborn, a scientist and the founder and owner of Oscorp, tries to secure an important military contract. He experiments on himself with an unstable performance-enhancing chemical and goes insane, killing his assistant. So this doesn't get too far into the plot and mostly just covers like the beginning of the origins for your characters, for Spider-Man and for Green Goblin. But because it introduces the character, even if this, I want to talk more specifically about these introductory scenes and how the characters are introduced, because for me, one, not only does it set things up right away with great opening credits and a great theme, they really need to bring back opening credits sequences and banger themes for superhero movies, but between the intro monologue with the "Who am I? You sure you want to know?" and just the various scenes of Peter getting bullied in school, MJ being really the only person supporting of him, you kind of get a feeling right away of who Peter Parker is, who Mary Jane is, why you should root for them both as individuals and as a couple, as well as both of the Osborns, knowing what they're about and why you should kind of pull for them even if they're semi-antagonistic.
Well, to add like more detail to what Jake is saying, like the introductions to all our characters are phenomenal. Like we basically get their dynamics almost right away. So we first start at the bus scene, and there we see, basically like the kids. Well, I'm going to say kids in like
they all look like they're 35 with a mortgage.
Kids, they're like freaking 30. They're like 30. They're like 35 at the minimum. But that's like my only flaw with this is because everything else is perfect. Like the camera was like working back. You see Mary Jane in there. You see the big hunky, maybe football player boyfriend. So you can see like, oh, he's like the popular guy. And then my favorite part, the guy eating the jelly donut. It just oozes all over his hand. And then he just looks over to his window and he's laughing at someone. And you realize it's Peter Parker. Because he's missed the bus yet again and he's trying to flag it down. But even the bus driver is laughing at him for being such a fucking loser. It's so great. It's amazing. And then once he finally arrives at school, you see the asshole playing Harry, and then William Dafoe, being Osborn, and you immediately get their dynamic. Like, it automatically, the scene is very awkward. It just seems like Harry is having such a hard time speaking to his father. He seems very intimidated by him, and then it just seems like Osborn just doesn't know like what's up with his son, or he calls him out on certain things. Like, I think, doesn't he call him like a coward or something? I don't know. I don't remember that part because I watched it like, I don't know, a couple days ago, but it is very awkward. And then Harry can't take it anymore. He goes out, and then he forgets his book bag. So then his father takes it out for him, and that's when he sees Peter. Immediately, it's like a shift tone, because he was like talking down to Harry, but when he sees Peter, he immediately starts talking to him like a proud father. And it just like watching Harry in the background, he looked like it was just eating him in the inside. And that's great. Like, you get all the character dynamics within like the first like 10 minutes of the movie. It's incredible.
I agree. Like, it definitely sets things up in a natural way where it doesn't like force it down your throat, but also very, very swiftly kind of shows you the dynamics and the relationships between each of these characters and the tensions between them, in a very smooth manner. You already from the beginning, from that first scene together, see like the kind of tension and jealousy between Harry and Peter, because Harry's dad doesn't give less of a shit about him, or so he feels, but is so happy to talk to Peter and so on. Like, it's such a natural way to do it, but it accomplishes it so quickly and so well.
Yeah, it's also really great that they managed to do it in such like quick succession and within such a short time at the beginning of the movie, where it's like you really need that at times, and with how many characters they're juggling, it's actually like really impressive that they managed to just, through really small tiny things, and some things bigger than others, but like through a lot of tiny details, they get all of their personalities in there, and you kind of see how they all mingle together.
Yeah, it's something that could definitely be very overwhelming for a viewer, but I don't think that they overwhelmed at all. They pretty gradually rolled out
They whelmed.
The introductions.
They whelmed.
They whelmed. I was very whelmed.
Hey, young Justice. So, the next day, Peter finds he's no longer nearsighted and has developed spider-like abilities. He could shoot webs out of his wrists and has quick reflexes, superhuman speed and strength, and a heightened ability to sense danger. Brushing off his Uncle Ben's advice that with great power comes great responsibility, Peter considers buying a car to impress Mary Jane. He enters an underground wrestling event to win the money for it, and wins his first match, but the promoter cheats him out of his earnings. When a thief robs the promoter's office, Peter allows him to escape. Moments later, he discovers that Ben was carjacked and killed. Peter pursues the carjacker, only to realize it was the thief that he let escape. The thief flees, but dies after falling out a window. Meanwhile, a crazed Norman interrupts a product test by Oscorp's rival Quest Aerospace and kills several people.
What I was gonna say is, like, it's been a while since I watched this movie. I've seen it a lot of times, but it has been years.
Sorry, real quick, we have all seen this before, correct?
In its full. Yes.
Okay, just double checking. Just double checking.
You did forget to mention that.
Sorry, Jace, continue.
But yeah, like I said, I've seen it plenty of times, but it's been years since I've seen it. And one thing I noticed more so watching it this time with more adult eyes that notice such things is that Sam Raimi is mostly known for, like, horror, yeah?
Yeah, Sam Raimi does a lot of horror, most known from the Evil Dead movies before this.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that in this movie. Like, there's, like, obviously this movie is far, far, far from a horror movie, but the way that he shows things in the movie, like, it is very, like, we talked about it earlier in the summary, but the scene where Norman takes the performance enhancers and kills his assistant, like that, it's a very, like, monster movie-esque scene. And then, you know, when Peter's discovering his powers, and I always hate the scene, but where he grows those little hairs on his fingers, it always freaks me out the way it's done. But my point is just that I think it's cool he kind of, despite this being such a vastly different movie than any horror movie ever, he still has that kind of touch on it that makes it feel like his own.
Well, fun fact about Sam Raimi is that he is a comic book fan, so he is familiar with the source material. I'm pretty sure he has, like, a huge comic book collection. I'm pretty sure it's in the thousands. So I am sure that, like, he had a lot of passion going into this project, and you could definitely feel it. But, like, as you said before, the Raimi-isms are there, especially how the way he works the camera. Like, everything's, like, in camera. There's a lot of good transitions, and then all, like, the close-ups, especially when Osborn turns into the Goblin for the first time, he, like, zooms in on the eyes, like it's like some kind of horror flick. And then it's just like, and then the transitions, the cheesy ass transitions, I love them. The fadeaways, right? The camera shots of, I don't know how to describe it, but, like, it's basically the shot when Peter first pulls up, like, the really good illustration of Spider-Man from his, like, notebook. There's no way he's that good at drawing. But anyway, it zooms in on the logo, and then it transitions.
That's Todd McFarlane art, actually, who wrote Spider-Man for a while in the 90s. You've probably, if I showed you the cover of his first issue of Spider-Man, you'd know it.
I mean, no, I know his cover art.
Oh, yeah, cool. Yeah, that's actually Todd McFarlane, I believe. Just fun fact.
But the thing is that, like, this stupid Wikipedia summary, like, totally skimmed over, like, the arc Peter had, where he was basically becoming, like, an asshat. Because when he first got his powers, like, and he was, like, trying to figure out how things work, the first thing he did was, even though he didn't start the fight with Flash Thompson, like, as Uncle Ben said it, he ended it. And then when he did that, when he punched Flash Thompson across the hallway, you know, there was, like, some elation in his face. But then we finally get to MJ's face, and she just looks at him like, what the fuck did you just do? Or, like, she just sees him like some kind of, like, monster. And then he has, like, a moment of shame where he, like, runs out and he figures out his powers. And here comes my favorite scene of him climbing up the wall, because I'm pretty sure it's all practical. I'm pretty sure you guys know what scene I'm talking about. It's the one where he starts climbing the wall for the first time, and it looks like he's climbing up the wall. It's so good. And the Danny Elfman score, it's incredible.
I didn't realize that Danny Elfman did this, but the score that is something that I particularly was making a note of. Like, especially as Matt's saying, in this scene, it was very dramatic, very, very fitting for every scene, but this scene particularly, I definitely noticed that as well.
I know, like, the scene when he climbs up the wall, every time he, like, you know, he takes a step forward, you hear, like, the trumpets, and then the music for when he's, like, jumping across buildings. I just love the Spider-Man themes, and they just sound so adventurous, don't you think? Like, every time I'm hearing this music, I want to, like, run outside or something.
It definitely is adventurous.
Going off of what...
But it's also very sorry, not to cut you off, but I just also want to say, it's also very suspenseful at times. Like, it definitely is, like, Danny Elfman did great of, like, fitting things for each mood. Like, when a scene needs to be suspenseful, the music's very suspenseful. And when it's, exciting, it's exciting. So it's not just this specific thing we're talking about. I want to give credit to the whole movie. Every time music is there, it's fitting.
Mm-hmm. But I do want to get back to something I was talking about earlier. Sorry, Jake, but I had to continue. So basically, like, I was supposed to call him Toby, but no, Peter was like slowly. He was slowly getting corrupted by his own power. He did it's kind of started with like the Flash Thompson fight, and then basically as he was going out, he promised his Uncle Ben that he was going to help him with the chores. I think it was like painting the kitchen, and then he had like he was painting the kitchen. But what he does instead is like go like find ways to like get MJ. If you guys remember, I think it was basically he had like a nice conversation with MJ in the backyard or something, and it was like a really nice conversation too, because MJ was just trying to escape her abusive family, and Peter just gives her words of encouragement. Like, I like their dynamic a lot, because it's not like the stereotypical like, oh, love at first sight relationship, especially like common in like the early 2000s and 90s movies. It's more like the they have good chemistry, and they kind of like give each other like what they kind of like fulfill each other, like and MJ like in this movie is really lacking in self-confidence, and she just feels like she has nowhere to go. And the words of encouragement she gets are from Peter. Like, Peter like compliments her acting. He says, "Oh, I think it was like some kind of play. You made me cry like a child." And then she commented it was in her first grade, but it doesn't change the fact that her acting or her performances moved him. And those were really encouraging words for her, and stuff that she really, really needed to hear especially at that time.
Yeah, I think that conversation between them in the backyard really is one of the best displays of Peter Parker's character that we see in this movie. Is just him. He's not trying to, despite his feelings for her, it's not like he's trying to flirt with her or anything. He saw her upset, and he's listening to her and talking to her, just being there. And
exactly,
he's putting her needs first. He doesn't have any kind of motive in that scene. He's just simply being a friend, and that's something that's so vital to his character, to just be a caring individual.
Bringing it back to the transformations, as I was going to prompt you guys about, I think the Goblin transformation scene is terrifying, and that's the sense where you can really get a feel for Raimi's horror origins, and it's not scary in the way where you're like shaking watching a really scary horror movie, but just like he uses that language for the emotional terrifyingness of what's happening to Norman, and then that being compared to the movie really opens with Norman almost as a co-lead, and you alternate, not quite, but you alternate basically like a scene with Peter, a scene with Norman, a scene with Peter, a scene with Norman. And this is Peter's transformation, this is Norman's. And while Peter's is kind of portrayed as, it's shown with wonder and this sense of this level of like opportunity that comes with it, even if it's still a little isolating, and Norman's is just like concerning, scary, and violent. And a lot of that does come across in the interactions that you two just talked about with Peter and MJ, even as Peter's, making selfish decisions. You see him talk to Mary Jane with this kindness, and Norman never has that for any of the people in his life, whether it's his son or whether it's his business associates. And then the other example being Rosemary Harris and Cliff Robertson is Aunt May and Uncle Ben, who I think are, without any doubt, in my opinion, the best at those roles that we've seen yet, are a big reason why it conveys as well. And seeing Peter have this grounding force in them that Norman never has. And it's all of these reasons combined that I think Raimi and Cope depict Spider-Man's origin in such a perfect way that I really don't think it ever needs to be depicted on film again. Post this, obviously it has been, but this could have been it, because obviously I have a bias. I could be way off base here, but I feel like the Spider-Man origin, basics of bit by radioactive spider, with great power there must also come great responsibility, Uncle Ben dying, is such a one of those elements of American pop culture that it seems like people were just born knowing the gist of. And I think this is in large part because of how well this movie just knocks it down efficiently, and just with such, like, it sounds cold to say with precision because it's such an emotional story, but frankly, that's how it is. There's just, no issues.
It's exactly to your point. Yeah, it's exactly to your point. It got the emotions to like a scientific accuracy to the point where it implemented itself into pop culture to the point where it's so popular that like trying to like replicate it is just kind of pointless. That's why the new Spider-Man movies, they didn't even get close to it until the last one, and it's not even said by Uncle Ben. So that it's just like one of those things where like there's just no point to like recreating the origins after that because they did it so well. And I'm sorry, but I try to get back to what I was saying before, like Peter's transformation. So like after his nice scene with MJ, he sees her go off with like these bunch of guys and girls in a nice car, and they basically motivates him to, like what Jake said before, like he's becoming selfish. He's going to use these powers to get money in this wrestling match. And in doing so, I'm skipping a little too much, but like basically he goes to his match and then he wins. Not by some miracle, but he was getting his ass whooped. It wasn't easy. But then he basically got conned. The promise was like $3,000, but he was instead giving $100. And then as like a form of revenge, when Jake said the guy got robbed of all his money, Peter lets him go because he wanted revenge, right? He was bitter about not getting the money he promised. And then we get to the next scene, and all of a sudden we see Uncle Ben on the floor, and they just say his car got napped. And then later on, after like a really good chase scene, I love the chase scene. The scene where like he was running down the hallway, it was so suspenseful, especially that music. Oh, the Danny Elfman score is amazing. But then when he finally catches up to the murderer, he realizes it's the guy he let go, right? And so all these things, right? His selfish actions, like and it didn't mention it, but his last conversation with Uncle Ben was him saying like the with great power with great responsibility line. He was basically trying to like make Peter understand that he's like he knows he's a good man, but he sees him going down the wrong path, and he wants him to remind him that there with great power comes great responsibility. Like that's it. And then I think didn't Peter say something about "you're not my dad, so don't lecture me"? I think it was something along those lines.
Yeah, he says "you're not my father," and he says "I know that," and he says "so stop acting like him" or something like that. So
Peter has to live with the guilt that not only did he inadvertently like help with his uncle's death, but that his last words were that he is not his father, even though Uncle Ben essentially is. And he just said it at a bitter moment. And after he graduated, it was just so obvious that he regretted every single word he said, and that was eating him on the inside. And then it was great because like there were consequences to his actions, and you see why he became a superhero. But yeah, that's it. That's all I have to say. Continue.
I guess like kind of I have two things, I guess. One, I do like that from this, it doesn't roll down the path of, as you see, both Norman and Peter transform into, what they are to become later on, Spider-Man and Green Goblin. But it's like, I like that it's essentially the same situation for both of them, but it doesn't feel like, so like, for example, when we watched Blade, it's just Blade versus evil version of himself, really, in the end. that's just how it essentially dumbs down to. And with this one, while it is the same thing, it doesn't inherently feel like they're the same thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sean, because to me, I feel like it feels like they're both very different characters who are just both handling the corruption of power that they're dealing with, and it's not so much that they're actually the antithesis of each other. They're just different people who are handling the same thing differently.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think about, and I really like that the story isn't like bad person or evil villain came out of hiding or managed to start to exist because superhero became superhero. This seems to be more like they just happen to have these issues happening at the same time, and it just clashes in the end. But the other thing that I also like that I don't think either of us have any of us have really mentioned was that the one thing I really do like about the beginning of this movie is that it's a lot more it focuses a lot more down to earth concepts, and a lot more on like Peter not as a superhero, but Peter is just Peter, along with all the other characters as just themselves, which is something that like there's a lot of earnest love in that for comics, and it's just great to see from like a human level, as opposed to like I say this now looking back in hindsight, but like as we see with like the MCU now and how it's more about inner superhero politics and not superheroes saving people on a civilian level. It's more seeing that like cosmic level of proportions now. It's just nice to see that kind of level of earnestness when it comes to portraying superheroes just saving people and just doing smaller things, and seeing it on a more personal level like this.
Well, I was just gonna first of all agree with Sean that it is great because, you know, one of the most common phrases tied to Spider-Man specifically is like friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and it doesn't feel like that in the MCU Spider-Man movies, to me at least, because it's so extravagant with everything that he's faced in his solo movies. It's so out there that it's like it doesn't feel like he's going around and saving the town. It just feels like this massive world-threatening thing and so on. So I do appreciate that so much, that it feels like not only do they spend a lot of time with Peter as Peter, but even him as Spider-Man, there are times where you see him stopping people from, you know, robbing convenience stores and things like that. Just like simple crime that he puts an end to because he feels like he should.
Yeah, I am so...
Well, to be fair...
Fuck
sorry.
you, Matt.
I'm just going to be real quick.
No.
To be fair, the first Spider-Man Homecoming did focus on Peter saving, like, you know, he was like helping people with like the smaller crimes, like stealing a bike and so on. So they did do it in the MCU. They just didn't continue that with the other Spider-Man sequels.
And also, I just also feel like this movie does a better job of doing it than they have, even when they have done it.
Here's the difference, and I'm really glad Sean, like literally when Sean brought this up and when Jason said friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, I like threw my hands in the air. I'm so happy that this came up, because one of the differences is the side characters and the background characters and the extras in this have personalities. They feel like you could walk up to anyone that appears for a single shot in this movie and have a conversation with them, that they have their own life going on. They walk around like New Yorkers, like they're busy as fuck. And you get these like,
oh, that's so
the
true.
Little, so like you get and it's both the actual supporting characters like Uncle Ben and Aunt May and Mary Jane and even Joe Manganiello's Flash Thompson that make it feel this way, as well as just you have that montage of street performers and random New Yorkers being interviewed about Spider-Man, which, fun fact, some of them are like actual actors, like Lucy Lawless has a cameo there. There's in general a lot of fun actors appearing in this movie, like Octavia Spencer and of course Bruce Campbell, but some of them are actually random New
Bruce
Yorkers
Campbell.
that they filmed. They actually just went up to like New York construction workers and had them do a scene. And as a result, there's just so much personality there that it adds to that human layer. It adds to that idea of Spider-Man is saving people, and it is about helping people because you have the ability to do so, so you should. And that's something that, while I do think there's good elements in both the Garfield and the Holland movies in that regard to an extent, none of them have been able to capture the feel that Raimi provided of just everybody is so alive and there's just so much personality.
I know. It's because they're so wacky, like real New Yorkers. Like, one was basically pretending that his brother saw Spider-Man and was claiming he wasn't actually a man. There was a girl who was horny about the possibility of Spider-Man having 8 arms. And then there was another woman who was also horny, was talking about his ass, but they cut that off to the performance. That was really funny. And then there was just, my favorite one was when they interviewed the construction worker, and he just says, I hate him so much. It's just so much personality. They just similar to like Spider-Verse, they give the city of New York a personality, and so it feels like they're in like a living, breathing world.
I was gonna say, the one thing I also want to add is the cinematography for this is fantastic, because a lot of where they did the shots were in partially, obviously some of them were sets and some of them were like, I believe in California, but like a lot of parts of this were set like in New York, and they filmed in New York, and that's one of the things that really makes it kind of stand out. Is you like, it does a lot better of showing off the city than other things do, and it feels like, you know, you're actually in New York as opposed to them making like a fake set. And one of the things that I also like, and this is just a little fun fact, but one of the scenes that they shot, I believe it's the one where they're this is further in the film, but like it's Peter on top with MJ on top of this garden near a cathedral, I believe, and it is
the couple in the background.
Yeah, with the couple in the background, and it's the same place where they filmed a scene with Kingpin in Daredevil, and it's just interesting to see like things like that crossover, where it's just these are noticeable spots in New York that just you don't think about, but like these are places I could go to. So it like really helps when it's like you see things from that perspective, and they choose such great and recognizable shots that maybe they aren't exactly like things that are famous per se, but more like they're areas that are notable if you know New York, I guess.
Yeah, it's all these little elements, the places they choose to film, the cinematography, the extras, that I think tie the through line together of, with great power there comes great responsibility, to Peter telling the guy who ripped him off, I missed the part where that's my problem, and then ultimately Uncle Ben's murder, which is something that, like, I've seen this movie countless times since I was 5 years old. It doesn't get easier to watch. It breaks my heart every time seeing Ben die, but then there's this hope of knowing the great selflessness that comes from that out of Peter, and that's just the essence of Spider-Man, helping people, the working class, the little guy, even people who try to hurt you. It's, with great power there must also come great responsibility. I think it's just like the greatest, most meaningful sentence ever written. It's just so human, and that's why, to me, like, this movie falls into a timeless subcategory of these movies that we're going to cover, that, like, so far I would say the Donner Superman movies and the Burton Batman movies and Mask of the Phantasm and now this are the only ones that I look at and go, you need to watch this. If you enjoy movies, you need to watch this. It doesn't matter if you're a superhero fan, it's just incredible, and it's the type of thing that everyone should experience and should have in them.
I agree.
I mean, yeah, like, people fell in love with this movie. I'm pretty sure, like, for a while, it had, like, the highest grossing for, like, an opening weekend.
Yeah, it did.
It was great.
One more note before we move on with the plot. Simple later question for you guys. What are your thoughts on organic webbing? Because that's one of the biggest departures in these Raimi movies. And I, myself, I'm always going to be partial to the man-made webbing just because that's the original, and I think it shows the ingenuity of Peter and the genius of Peter. But these movies do plenty else to show that, and I think the organic webbing is a fun little twist that I'm kind of glad happens.
Okay, so I get why people don't like it, is because it takes away from Peter's intelligence. Because the thing about Peter is that he's a super genius, and so he's able to make not organic webbing, he's able to make webbing just using, like, the materials of, like, a high school lab. But at the same time, I'd argue that it's all organic webbing also makes sense for Peter, because he, again, is a broke ass high school student. He is also, like, pretty, like, it's also, like, pretty, you also have to, like, have like some sort of sense of disbelief when you're seeing like a high schooler like make organic webbing. Like, what kind of materials do you think will make an organic webbing, especially one that is cheap? So I think it kind of goes both ways, and it's not like they undermine his intelligence in the movie. Like, in the movie, he won like the science award. He is shown to be very smart. It's one of the reasons why Norman Osborn looks up to Peter so much and sees him as his son, or like even like a successor to his company, or sees him as like a version of himself, is because he's super intelligent. And he even got a job with Dr. Connors, which is a cameo, but because of his responsibilities of Spider-Man, it got him fired. But it still showed that he could work with a professor at a university. He is very smart. And so it doesn't really take away his intelligence in this movie specifically.
I agree, and I also think that I don't care that much, for one. Like, either way, I think it's fine, whether it's web cartridges, organic web, whatever. But I always just felt like in this, it just makes sense if it's organic webbing, just because why would he get all the other physical attributes of a spider but not be able to make web? That's always just how I looked at it.
I always feel weird when I think about it too much, but I think I never really thought about it when I was like a kid. But the more I think about it, the more I feel disturbed, and the more I don't want to think about it anymore.
Fair enough. Well, on that note, upon graduating, Peter begins to use his abilities to fight injustice, donning a spandex costume and the masked persona of Spider-Man. J. Jonah Jameson, publisher of the Daily Bugle newspaper, hires Peter as a freelance photographer since he's the only person providing clear images of Spider-Man. Upon discovering that Oscorp's board plans to oust him for selling to sell the company to Quest, Norman assassinates them. Jameson dubs the mysterious killer the Green Goblin. The Goblin offers Peter a place at his side, but he refuses. They fight, and Peter is wounded. At Thanksgiving dinner, Peter's Aunt May invites Mary Jane, Harry, and Norman. During the dinner, Norman sees the wound and realizes Peter's identity. Thinking the only way to defeat Peter is to attack those special to him, Norman later attacks May, forcing her to be hospitalized. So, a few things to talk about here, and one of them's got to be the suits, just because you're talking about our previous few movies being the Blade movies, which rightfully so have just all black leather costumes, and then the X-Men movies, which make a point over the fact that they're too cool for the costumes. And then just a couple years later from X-Men, you get a practically one-to-one adaptation of Spidey's suit. And Goblin, while he may not have a comic accurate suit per se, Gobby's flying around in a Power Rangers costume. And I think it's no surprise that these movies aged better visually, especially in the costume area. That disregarding the fact that Raimi's probably the best director, except maybe Del Toro, of those ones we just mentioned, the costumes just look so much better.
Yeah, and I mean, they put the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man costume and the Green Goblin costume in a movie recently with Spider-Man No Way Home, and they still looked fine in 2022 or whenever that movie came out.
And I want to say it's a hot take, but I love the Green Goblin costume in this. People have really always hated on it, but I don't really know that a true to comic one would work that well. I don't know. I'm not convinced. I've seen the one they tested for this, and I think it looks pretty bad. But I've always been a fan of the Power Ranger armored Green Goblin look.
I don't even, regardless of whether or not a comic accurate one would have looked good, I just think this one looks tough as fuck.
Yeah, I always liked it, me being like, I was a kid who loved Power Rangers, so like, I loved it to death.
I mean, me
same. I loved it to death when I was a little kid, so like, it stuck with me forever, and I still love it.
I don't know.
Exactly.
I just think, like, it's bright green. It has this weird goblin face. It's pointy at the end. It's dope. Like, it looks like a villain in a comic book, and that's what it's meant to be.
And the glider looks great, too.
Sick. The glider is sick as well.
And I mean, it's a comic book, man. Like,
and I have to
things
say,
can be
like,
funny. Things can be cheesy. Things can have
Yeah.
Power Ranger suit. What's wrong with that? I don't understand.
Well,
like,
first of all, like, we're already talking about a guy who injected himself with performance-enhancing drugs and is now, like, two different people who murders people. Why can't he be in a green Power Ranger suit? Like, what's the big deal with that?
I actually like...
He's already called the Green Goblin and flies around throwing pumpkin bombs at people. What's the big deal?
I actually liked it so much. As a kid, my dad, who got me into comic books and got me into specifically Spider-Man, which is just had such a profound effect on, I think, my like personal like morals and personality and just interests. For his birthday, I, in air quotes, bought him an action figure of this Green Goblin, and by I bought him that, my mom definitely bought it so I could play with it. But that's like, it just, I want it, like, it just, like, this movie had such a grip on me from childhood till still now.
Yeah, shout out Dad, by the way. He's sick.
Yeah, cool guy. But Dad.
While we're still talking about Green Goblin, I don't want to let it go unmentioned that it is just such a fucking treat that we got to see Willem Dafoe play Green Goblin and Norman Osborn in this.
Oh, absolutely.
Believe it or not, he wasn't actually going to be cast for the role.
Who, really? Do you know who was?
Yeah. So basically, Sam Raimi was not going to hire William Dafoe for the role, but William just kept pestering Sam Raimi about it to the point where he finally got it, because he really, really wanted to play Green Goblin, because he was fascinated with the character,
and he
also sorry, just real quick, you just see, like, just in his performance, that he's having a blast.
And I actually, in addition to that, I saw an interview with Willem Dafoe where he talked about like some of his iconic roles, and he talked about how badly he wanted to do Spider-Man because it was so different from anything he had done, and he had never done wire work. And I know Sean mentioned he did like 90% of his stunts, and a lot of that was because he had never done wire work in a movie before, and he just was really excited to do it. And I think that that's sick, because he's such a actor who just loves acting and loves pretending and having fun, and that's why he does it. And I think that's so sick that he just was like, well, I want to do the stunts because that's part of acting and that's fun for me.
Yeah.
And it comes across so much in his performance because he commands the screen every time he's on it, whether he's Norman or whether he's Green Goblin. It's such different characters that he has to play, and he nails both of them in such an over-the-top but not in a bad way type of way.
Here's what I think some of it is that nails it is comic books have such exaggerated faces very often, exaggerated poses, in a way that we talked about previously, Wesley Snipes' poses and Jim Carrey as Riddler in Batman Forever. But Willem Dafoe does things with his face that are like very silent film era-esque in how exaggerated they are for expressionistic purposes, and that really works well for what you're adapting here, especially a character like Green Goblin with this cartoony mask that he usually wears. You almost don't even need it because you just have Willem Dafoe's face and what he can do with it. It's peak Goblin, and there's like him dressing up as an old lady in a flaming building is just peak Green Goblin. There's so many peak character moments in general, with like the Spidey upside down kiss with MJ is peak Spider-Man, but and it all really also is, while talking about Goblin, I want to bring something else up. But first, I just got to say, all of the Spider-Man versus Goblin action scenes, fight scenes, are raw as hell. And it carries over into the blood drop scene before Thanksgiving dinner is so tense. Again, I've seen this movie countless times and on my edge of my seat as that blood drips from Peter and Norman's in the room. It's nuts. But speaking of peak character, J.K. Simmons is J. Jonah Jameson. Just the embodiment of corruption of journalism, but also strangely and magnetically lovable, and also somehow feels noble. Yeah, we got to talk about J.K. Simmons, guys.
He is peak casting, and honestly, I don't think anything else in the world, no matter how many more movies come out in like probably the next couple hundred years, will ever top J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. It's fantastic. It's iconic. They brought him back, so that just speaks to his, iconic status.
I'm I mean, like, on top of that, I'm so impressed by, like, for this movie being back in the day, for how fantastic they were with casting just about everybody in this movie. When I think of these characters, it's really hard to disassociate them with the actors they have playing them, for most of them anyways, I should say.
Even relatively unimportant ones, like Elizabeth Banks is Betty Brant, and she's freaking perfect for that. But yeah, I mean, you just can't. J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson is, despite being just like a supporting cast member, is undeniably one of the best comic book castings ever. While visiting Aunt May in the hospital, Mary Jane admits her infatuation with Spider-Man, who has rescued her on numerous occasions, and asks Peter whether Spider-Man ever asked about her. Harry, who's dating Mary Jane, sees her holding Peter's hand and assumes she has feelings for him. Devastated, Harry tells his father that Peter loves Mary Jane, unknowingly revealing Spider-Man's biggest weakness. Norman holds Mary Jane and a Roosevelt Island tramcar full of hot children hostage alongside the Queensboro Bridge. He forces Peter to choose whom he wants to save and drops them both. Peter saves Mary Jane in the tramcar. Norman then throws him into a nearby abandoned building and brutally beats him. Peter gains the upper hand, and Norman reveals himself and begs for forgiveness while subtly getting his glider ready to impale Peter from behind. Warned by his spider sense, Peter dodges the attack, and the glider impales Norman instead. Norman tells Peter not to reveal his identity as the Goblin to Harry before dying. Peter takes Norman's body to the Osborn house, but is found by Harry, who pulls a gun on him, but Peter escapes. That's a lot to unpack there, but one of the first things is, I kind of talked about it briefly, but just, we're covering a lot of action sequences here, the flaming building, the stuff on the bridge, and I want to talk about the stuff on the bridge specifically, but in general first, can we talk about how wonderful all of the fights are, in large part due to wire work?
Wanted to say I'm a big proponent of wire work because I think it looks better than CGI. I get very frustrated with how much CGI is in things these days. I think wire work always is the better option.
Well, I was just going to say, as a connoisseur of Super Sentai series, as well as watching plenty of Hong Kong films, I'll tell you, this movie gets an A+ for me because, oh my goodness, the fight scenes are exhilarating. Like, nothing ever, like the things with like a lot of action movies is that like they don't really have like any oomph to like the hits and the punches that they throw. But in this movie, it's not the case at all. Like, in like one of the beginning fights, I'm pretty sure it was during like the Macy's parade, right? And when Spider-Man starts getting punched by Green Goblin and kicked through the light pole, you feel every single punch. It feels like it'll hurt like hell. And it helps that everything is practical. It's not a CG rubber band moving around. It's an actual human being doing all those fights, and it just absorbs you, and it's great. I wish they do more of them. Like, another perfect example in the same fight scene is when Green Goblin slams Spider-Man into the freaking the glass and starts slamming his head through the wooden frames. It was brutal.
Oh god, yeah, that was insane, especially when like the bomb blew up in his face. Like, you could feel.
Yeah, exactly. That's the ending fight scene, and we should save that for last because that fight scene is amazing. But yeah, like, the fights are so freaking good. They're so good. And I'm going to sidetrack again because there's another thing that I really like this movie. It's so quotable. There's so many good lines. Like, one of the lines that stuck to me in the beginning was when Norman Osborn was about to experiment himself, and then I believe the line was, oh, excuse me, I burped. I believe the line was 40,000 years of human evolution, and we haven't even tapped the vastness of human potential. I think that was the quote.
I don't know. Nothing still, to me, in terms of lines, beats I had to beat an old lady with a stick to get these cranberries. I still think that's my favorite. I don't care what anybody else has to say.
There's also, I'm somewhat of a scientist myself, which everybody quotes these days. Rightly so, because that line was expertly done by Willem Dafoe. Oh my god! I mean, maybe it's just Willem Dafoe. Maybe I just love Willem Dafoe. That could be what I'm just ranting about right now, and I don't think most people would mind that.
No, not at all. I can't tell you how happy I am that you guys are as fucking like head over heels about this movie as I am, because I really am.
Been head over heels about this movie. I've been looking so forward to talking about this movie because
Me too, buddy.
The Raimi. I do kind of like 3, despite how messy it is, but like the trilogy. I really really like the trilogy.
Yeah, I love this movie, and I will say I've been greatly looking forward to rewatching it because I haven't seen it in a long time, like I mentioned, and I gotta say it was even better than I remember it.
Yeah, same thing for me. I hadn't seen this movie in so long, and I was so looking forward to actually just watching it again because I kind of miss it, and also like on top of that, it just has like, I said this about Superman too when we first watched that, but it has a sense of like earnest love for like comics, and you just feel that in every scene and every piece of this movie, that it's not something you see too often, or it's something we really get presently that often either. So I just really love when you can feel that throughout the movie.
You are so absolutely right. I think that almost sums up in a sentence what makes the movie work is its sincerity about its love for the source material and the complete lack of shame or embarrassment, because there shouldn't be any. And it's the reason that like when like Goblin attacks May and he crashes in while she's praying and gets to the deliver us, and he crashes through and, you know, say it, and the from evil, and it's so dramatic and it's so played up and campy, and it's just so fucking Sam Raimi too, just like hell yeah, you know. But it works because of the fact that everyone's spot in, everyone loves it, everyone's so sincere about it, and it lets you walk this like tightrope of fear and sympathy that we feel for Norman / Green Goblin, and seeing both sides of that man, and you know, and it comes down to this. When you get to the climax of the movie with Goblin hanging Mary Jane from a thread, and hanging this tram full of children from a thread, and you know, we are who we choose to be, now choose. That's another line that doesn't work without that level of sincerity to convey these ideas that the movie has. But it's just such a perfect finale to visualize this idea of responsibility, because Peter has a responsibility to MJ, but he has a responsibility to those people too, because he may not know them, but he can help them. And just, it's such a wonderful way to visualize the heart and soul of this character and of this film and of this first film adaptation of one of maybe the most beloved comic book character of all time. And it all comes back to that sincerity. Whether it's the quiet moments, my heart rips out when MJ lies to Peter about acting, and then her boss comes out and yells at her earlier in the movie, and you feel for her. Or the quiet moments that like Matt brought up before of them in their backyard, or if it's just Goblin and Spider-Man just punching the shit out of each other, because it's just this war of what they both represent and how bloody that is, and it all just comes back to them just so truly meaning everything.
Fun fact to ruin this moment of sincerity: I was looking up details and things about the movie just because I never looked into the production of this movie, and I didn't know James Cameron did a treatment of the script apparently, and had written in it was terrible.
Yeah, he was originally going to do a Spider-Man movie where Mary Jane and Spider-Man have sex on the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah, and it was like, what the fuck?
That sounds awful.
Why would?
And it's like Electro. I think Electro and Hydra Man were the villains, but they weren't actually at all like Electro and Hydra Man other than their powers. They were just like OCs with those powers.
That
and it was
sounds
going to star
terrible.
Leonardo DiCaprio. And thank God it didn't happen. I mean, James Cameron, fucking legend, but like, come on.
That just sounds terrible. I don't want to imagine that.
The thing is that people complain about Tobey Maguire, but Tobey fits like this style of Spider-Man, like the Sam Raimi style is super campy, right? It's at the same time it's taken seriously, but at the same time it's like super sincere, but also super campy. He fits that so well, and I don't know. I don't Leonardo DiCaprio. I just feel like it's just too dramatic of an actor to be, be able to fit into like a Sam Raimi movie.
He's too like preppy rich guy,
Yeah.
It just rule of thumb, everything that's out there about the Cameron version of this, again, no shade at James Cameron, absolute film legend, one of the greatest to ever do it, but when you're adapting something, you're never going to do a good job if you have a clear embarrassment or even just like disdain for the thing you're adapting. And it just really seems like it's this, like there's, and I think that reflects in a lot of the stuff we've watched so far and will continue to watch. And it just, the knowledge that's out there about the Cameron version of Spider-Man just really seems like it's afraid to be Spider-Man. And Raimi never was. So,
exactly.
Before getting to this last paragraph, I also just want to hit on Norman's death, because the final confrontation between them in that, torn down house that leads to Goblin accidentally killing himself, and the final utterances.
Hang on. We gotta talk about the fight first. We gotta
go
final fight.
Go for it.
Sean,
Talk
you too,
away.
You said you also wanted to talk about it.
No,
please
I
do.
don't want to talk anymore.
Okay, I'll do all the talking then. But oh my goodness, the final fight. See, the fights at like the beginning of the film were really good, but this final fight, it's just brutal with like a capital B. You feel every punch, and Peter is just totally helpless. He's completely flustered because he's just being beaten and thrown everywhere. And then every single counterattack he tries to do is just being countered by Goblin himself. And oh my goodness. First off, like as Sean mentioned before, like the Green Goblin throws a freaking grenade at Peter's face. And you see the damage it does. Like he's bleeding all over the face. And he looks bruised and battered. And then it's just an onslaught of punches. And he throws him to the ground, and Peter makes like a little yelp noise, and you just for like a second, it makes you believe that he's just beating on like a kid, and it's so sad. But yeah, Sean, go on with what you're saying.
Yeah, I was gonna say kind of the same that what you were saying was that like I love how brutal and raw, and how there's this big surprising build up to it, and they just managed to do it where it like. I don't want to say it feels out of left field for the rest of the movie, but it definitely hits a lot harder when it's like you genuinely feel like Peter has a chance of dying, and they manage to make those stakes genuinely felt in the fight itself, and not just like I'm going to kill you. And it's more of like you can see the genuine threat that Goblin poses to Spider-Man, and like seeing what he's capable of doing. And I just love that they managed to capture that throughout, and they don't really back down from like what could be a fairly, I don't know if traumatizing is the right word, but a fairly graphic scene. I think they do a great job of stepping up to the plate and showing how viscerally destructive it could be in that situation for Spider-Man.
Like there are times like it's just kind of hard to watch. I can see people, like certain people, just like watching this movie and enjoying it and just covering their eyes in the final confrontation, because it's not even, as Sean said, it doesn't come out of left field. It doesn't feel like this scene doesn't belong. It still feels like a Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie, but it's just so like it's just so menacing the way that Spider-Man just gets beaten down. And it doesn't help. Well, it does help in this case that there's no music. Like throughout this entire beatdown, there's no music whatsoever. It's just silence, and the only thing you can hear are like the punches that Peter is enduring. It's awful. It's crazy. I love it.
The one thing that I also want to add that I really do like about it too is that like by showing how potentially how like this could potentially kill Spider-Man, it does a lot to show off while they are two essentially superpowered people fighting each other in the middle of some random place. You're seeing that like they're still to a degree human, because there's still the viscerally felt, like you can viscerally feel that one of them is going to die, or that like either one of them has a chance of dying, and that is inherently a very human thing. So it kind of, to me in a way, adds to a lot more of the whole concept of Spider-Man himself, and I think it does a great job of bringing it all together, even though it's just a fight scene, but like they do a really good job of like making it make sense for the rest of the movie, and also bringing in so many more themes to it than just like it's the final confrontation.
And I think the reason all of that noise and brutality is important is because you go from the loudness of Goblin trying to kill Spider-Man to the soft final words from Norman of "Don't tell Harry," and the idea that Peter, after all that Goblin has done, and sharing a face with Norman, to then look at him and still be upset at Norman's death, and the tenderness and kindness that he cares with the body and leaving it at the Osborn household. And then, of course, the tragedy of his best friend seeing him leave the body. And now Harry's going to have this hatred and just like lust for revenge against his best friend, but he doesn't even know it. That's just such wonderful, sadly wonderful dramatic irony. And I think just kind of if you could only make one Spider-Man movie ever, if there was and I'm not just talking about the ones like that exist, but even hypothetically, I think this has to be it, because the way it just gets all the essentials, with Peter, the Osborns, MJ, which, real quick, speaking of essential, side note to Spider-Man comic editorial, what the fuck is wrong with you? Let MJ and Peter be married and start a family already. People aren't going to stop reading because of it. Fucking knock it off. Okay. Anyway, and just to go from that fight where you really seems like Peter could die, to that is such, it's just emotional. It really, like, I don't have a better word for it. It's just, I can't not be emotional about it.
Oh yeah, because he was getting beaten down and it looks like he's about to die. And then, oh my goodness, the scene where Green Goblin is taunting Peter is so good, especially when you see the his mouth through like the mouthpiece, if you remember that. And I don't know, like, does Willem Dafoe have like sharp teeth or something? But his mouth like looks like the Green Goblin teeth. The way he's just baring his fangs is so good. But anyway, like, as soon as he brings up, like, oh, I'm going to kill MJ as soon as I'm done with you, Peter just gets up, and you just get that classic, like, you know, Spider-Man gets up despite being beat down moment. And it's such again, another beat down, but in the reverse. Because first he throws Green Goblin to a wall, and then he brings down the freaking brick wall onto Green Goblin. He then drags him up to another wooden wall and starts beating the ever-living crap out of him by just laying a bunch of punches to his helmet. It's insane. He probably sustained like 3 concussions with that. Yeah, like that ending scene. It's just that ending scene of Peter like acknowledging that Uncle Ben was his father, or was his father figure. It was really nice. And I'm really happy.
Well, that's actually what I want to move us on through, the last little paragraph here. At Norman's funeral, Harry swears vengeance on Spider-Man, whom he holds responsible for the death of his father. Mary Jane confesses to Peter that she loves him. Peter, however, feels he must protect her from the unwanted attention of his enemies, so he hides his true feelings and tells Mary Jane that they can only be friends. As Peter leaves, he recalls Ben's words and accepts his new responsibility as Spider-Man. I think this movie ends with... It's a bittersweet, almost outright sad ending, I think, to a bittersweet movie, because even though the good guy on paper wins the day, he doesn't get the girl. His best friend wants to kill him and doesn't even realize it. His Uncle Ben's dead. Him and Aunt May are still, below the poverty line. There's no easy solutions and only tough choices. Harry walking in, on Spider-Man leaving Norman's dead body, in the fallout that will come from that, and Peter having to deny himself happiness and hurt Mary Jane, despite their love for each other. It's just the sacrifices made out of responsibility, the feeling of not hurting not only yourself, but the ones you love to do the right thing because you have to do the right thing. And that lesson he learned from Ben at such an awful cost. It's really, really sad, but then you still get this release of catharsis from all this heartache on this final swing through the city and their ending shot of him on the flagpole. It's wow. Like the amount of emotion in this storytelling of building up all that hurt, but Peter gets it out on that swing, and you still see like why he is Spider-Man, because of the lessons he learned and because what it can mean for the good of everybody, even if there's these tough choices. It's perfect. It's perfect.
Yeah, that was said perfectly. Like, the only thing I'll add is Peter's face when Harry said to him that you're the only family I have left. You can see the guilt eating at him. Like, it looked like he was so uncomfortable with that statement, knowing that he was there at Osborn's death. It was so sad. But yeah, it is very bittersweet, and it is, like Jake said, the perfect ending to a Spider-Man film. These are the sacrifices he needs to make in order to become Spider-Man, and it's tough, but that's why you love Peter Parker so much, is because even though he is a superhero, it's real life stuff that gets him down.
I just wanted to say, like, I think that's such a vital part of the Spider-Man character in such a world of, superhuman things and everything. He still feels very human with his struggles. He still is depicted with day-to-day issues such as these, and that's something that I think is such an important part of the character, and this movie continues to show that so well.
All right, well, I kind of want to get my least favorite thing out of the way, because it took me like a while to even think of one. Ultimately, the only kind of moment that's a little weird to me is the "you're just like me" conversation that Goblin gives Spider-Man on the rooftop after capturing him in like one of their first encounters. It's kind of cliche. Just the whole "you're just like me" thing. It's just, it's whatever. Ultimately, it works for the general gist of the movie, but the speech as a whole is just a little bit, heard it before. That said, I mean, this movie's just damn near perfect. It's hard for me to believe, even all these years later, how much of the Spider-Man mythos, like on all the essential bits that it gets in on just first try and just lets flourish. My favorite thing, like, I don't know if this is cheating because it's going to be kind of like just a concept, but just the way they knock down with great power, there must also come great responsibility. That you hit that so flawlessly and so impactfully that, like, I can't imagine a person walking away from this movie and not having that ingrained in their heart. And so that's got to be my favorite thing about one of my favorite movies, and so far my favorite movie that we've covered, and one of my favorite comic book movies that we will cover, I'm sure, because it's anything I could dream it to be growing up loving Spider-Man. So of course I recommend it, whether you like this stuff or not. Please give it a watch, because it's just so heartfelt, and I think it's like genuinely important piece of filmmaking beyond just the like subcategory of these things, this cape shit that we're fans of. It's just genuinely great.
Well, it's like movies like this and Deadpool, the first Deadpool, that kind of just showed that, like, if you just make a comic, if you like just make a movie that's really heavily inspired by the character it's based on, and you have a lot of love for it, people will love it too. And you don't have to, like, I don't know, like, change it for like mainstream audiences at all, or like go for what's cool. Like the original X-Men is a perfect example. But yeah, like, as long as like the creators believe in it, the audience will believe in it, because that belief and that passion will bleed into the movie. Yeah, it's basic that.
My least favorite part, I would just have to say, is the fact that everyone in this high school looks like they have an average age of about 36. Just because I just think it's dumb to do that. I think that that's a trend that was stupid when it was prevalent, and I'm glad it's less prevalent now. That being said, it's tough to pick a favorite part, because everything that Jake just said applies to how I feel about this. Like I said earlier, what'd you say?
I was gonna say I could throw in more stuff. I didn't even talk about the use of crossfades to really make it feel make the whole movie feel like it's creative comic book paneling. You can cop that as a favorite.
No, what I was going to say is that my favorite thing is Willem Dafoe's performance as Green Goblin and Norman Osborn, because I do feel like they're two vastly different characters that he executes so well, and the transitions between the two so well. And I'm a noted Willem Dafoe fan in general, but I think he's just one of the best actors ever, because Jake always talks about how good this movie is, yada yada yada, but he really doesn't undersell it. I'm not even as much of a Spider-Man fan as he is, and I was very invested. It's hard for me to keep my focus on a movie, but I stayed invested in this movie on my own watching it, and I highly recommend it. It's fantastic.
So yeah, definitely fantastic movie. I can't really add anything that hasn't already been said. This movie's fantastic. It has, to me, in my opinion, shot up to the top of the list of the things that we've watched so far in terms of our rankings that we have that are concurrently ongoing with what we are watching, except Matt and I don't know if Jason is updating it, but I am.
I'll force them to eventually.
But so I think the best thing to this movie, and I mentioned it multiple times already, but like just how earnest it is. I genuinely love how, while having some like fairly bittersweet moments, the movie tends to be fairly wholesome, and at the same time just does such a great job of getting its message across and being so hopeful about it, and being so genuinely honest with themselves about the concept and understanding just how much it means. That you really don't get a lot of movies like that, where they just genuinely take the whole concept to heart and really push forward with that, which I think a lot of movies need to do more of, especially nowadays when we have so much going on that is so depressing. That it's just nice. This movie, to me, especially to me, watching it this time around came at a good time, where it was like, it felt like something I needed. So I genuinely love just how nice it can be to have movies that are just so earnest and honest with themselves. And my least favorite thing, I guess Jason already kind of mentioned it, was the thing, oh, they're all so old. When I see it, I don't think that they're in high school. I think that they're all like either in college, they've graduated, or they're like the fucking 40-year-old who went back to college. Like, none of them look like they're in high school, and it's just weird. But otherwise, yeah, definitely recommend it. It's a goddamn classic. Watch it, please. It's like a must.
So, if you haven't been listening to this nearly hour and a half podcast, actually, no, wait, it's going to be edited down, but this over hour long podcast of me rambling about this movie, yeah, I like this movie. Surprise. And I definitely recommend it. And as Jake stated, it's honestly really hard to find flaws with this film, because like it doesn't really miss a step, and the casting, despite being old, are all great. And so I can't even say like that's like a big mistake, although during some of the close-ups of Tobey Maguire, even though he's in high school, you can see like the beard line, if you know what I'm saying. Like, you see like the places that are darker in skin tone, and that's obviously where the beard grows. He shaved it. Other than that, like, this movie's flawless. It's honestly flawless for me. It's so good. Every single moment is amazing, and you should watch it. Honestly, like,
can you pick out a favorite element from all the greatness?
A favorite? Oh my god, that's so hard, man. I really have to dig deep for this. I want to say the action, but like, it's just so much more. I guess like I'm going to cheat and just say what I love the most about this movie is the sincerity that it has. It's not afraid to be cheesy, silly, but like it's also not afraid to be serious. And you believe every single second of it. And that's my favorite part of the movie, is that you just feel the passion that Sam Raimi and his team had in making this film. And thank you so much, Sam Raimi. He probably will never hear this, but thank you, because this movie is amazing, and it is one of my favorite movies of all time, which is why I was so looking forward to speaking about it. I love it so much. And yes, I recommend it. Surprise. All right.
Well, yes, I second that. Thank you to anyone and everyone involved in making this movie. Thank you to ALO VFX for our art. You can follow him on Twitter at ALOVFX. You can follow me on Letterboxd, Jake Walter 98 on Letterboxd. Thank you to Jason for making our intro outro music.
Hey, that's me. I made the intro outro music. I dabble in making music. I have a SoundCloud called The Upsides. You can follow me on Instagram at The Upsides PA, on Twitter at @the_upsides PA. Like I said, I made the intro outro music. I'm working on a few songs. Hopefully those will be getting ready to come out soon. I just set up a new studio setup for myself, so hopefully that'll motivate me to record more. But like I said, you could listen if you want. If not, cool.
All right. And if you're interested in continuing to listen to us, you can follow us at illiterate_pod for both Twitter and Instagram. You can reach us at culturalitteratepod@gmail.com. All episodes are on Anchor, Spotify, which actually I think Anchor's bought by Spotify now. But anyway, Apple Podcasts and YouTube. The channel name on YouTube is Culture Illiterate Podcast. And next episode, we'll be covering perhaps the most aggressively 2000s movie that we'll cover, use of nu metal and all, Daredevil. And in particular, we're going to talk about the more favorably thought of director's cut. So come back in a couple weeks for that.